They laughed at the way I spoke. Not the words, not the meaning, just the sound. One syllable wrong, and it echoed louder than the whole sentence. One vowel too soft, and they made sure everyone heard it. Especially him. The boy with the smirk and the microphone voice. He turned my accent into a punchline, and the class roared. But I didn't flinch. Not on the outside. Inside, something cracked. Not broken. Just shifting. I stopped raising my hand. Stopped speaking up. Stopped showing up. They thought I disappeared. But I was just rehearsing. For a stage they couldn't imagine. Now my voice. It fills theaters. And TED Talks. And silence that finally listens. My name is Aaliyah Carter. I'm 27 years old. And I live in Atlanta, Georgia. They say America is the land of opportunity. But I've learned that sometimes that opportunity wears a mask. Sometimes it hands you a microphone, and sometimes it rips it away before you even speak. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but English was not my first language, not really. My parents were Haitian immigrants. At home, we spoke Creole, danced to compa music in the kitchen, and bowed our heads to pray before every meal. My mother still says God speaks all languages, but understands silence best. I was the smart kid growing up. Honor student. Science fair finalist. My report cards were lined with A's like a string of pearls. People expected me to become someone impressive. A doctor, maybe. Or a lawyer. Something with letters after my name. And I wanted that, too. I wanted the big house. The framed degrees. The perfect pronunciation. I wanted to sound like I belonged in the room. But accents don't ask for permission before entering your sentences. They follow you like shadows. Subtle to you but loud to everyone else. It didn't become a problem until college. I got into Hillcrest University, a top-tier school just outside Boston. Big classrooms. Bigger expectations. Everyone walked like they were going somewhere fast. The air was thick with ambition, and insecurity wore high heels. That's where I met Ryan Matthews. Blonde. Confident. Laughed loud. Spoke louder. He was the kind of guy people instinctively listened to. Not because he was smart, but because he made it sound like he was. We were in Public Communication 101. A required class, ironically. Our first assignment was to introduce ourselves in front of the class. Simple. 1 minute of speaking. I had rehearsed all night. I knew every line. But when I stood up and said, "Hi, my name is Aaliyah Carter, and I'm from New Jersey but my roots are Haitian," Ryan interrupted me mid-sentence. He cupped his ear dramatically and said, "Can you say that again? In English this time?" The class exploded in laughter. I froze. I didn't even understand what was funny at first. Then it hit me. He was mocking the way I said roots. The slight dip in my R. The rhythm in my sentence. My voice didn't carry the same flat tone as his. The professor smiled awkwardly and moved on. No one said a thing. Not even me. After class, a girl whispered, "Don't worry. He's like that with everyone." But it didn't feel like everyone. It felt like me. Like us. Like every kid who grew up speaking 2 languages and got graded only on one. I skipped the next class. And the next. I told myself I was tired. That I needed rest. But really I was shrinking. At home, I didn't mention it. I told my mom I was doing fine. She kept saying, "Just stay focused, Sherry. These people don't define you." But what if they did? What if how I said something mattered more than what I said? Soon, my grades started slipping. Not because I didn't understand the material, but because I stopped participating. Presentations? Skipped. Group discussions? Muted. I began to hide behind email replies. Behind text. Behind the comfort of silence. That semester, I went from straight A's to a transcript I didn't recognize. I dropped out of public communication. I told the counselor it didn't align with my major. The truth? I couldn't bear the sound of my own voice echoing off those judgmental walls. At home, my father glanced at my transcript and said, "Communication class? You're running from your own tongue." I remember walking away from that conversation with a lump in my throat that wouldn't go down. My older brother, Darius, called me out too. So, what now? Gonna let some white boys joke shut you down forever? I didn't answer, because deep down I wasn't sure. I tried to pivot, changed my major to sociology, took more reading-heavy courses, avoided anything that required me to speak in front of others. I built a life inside my head, a place where I couldn't be interrupted. But no matter how quiet I got, that one moment, the laugh, the pause, the humiliation, played on a loop. It's funny how one joke can take up more space in your memory than 4 years of lectures. In sophomore year, I stopped attending club meetings. The Haitian Student Union reached out. I ignored it. I didn't want to be reminded of who I was, or who I was failing to be. I didn't date, didn't go to parties. I became a background character in my own college life. Even my dorm roommate, Jasmine, noticed the change. You used to talk in your sleep. Now you don't even talk when you're awake. She said it with a laugh, but it landed like a diagnosis. I began writing instead. Pages and pages. Not essays. Not poems. Just thoughts. Anger. Observations. Speeches I would never give. Every time I tried to imagine myself talking in front of people, I heard Ryan's voice in the background, mocking every syllable. But there was this quiet urge inside me, a whisper saying, "What if your voice could make people pause in a good way?" Still, I buried that thought. Senior year came and went. Graduation photos were taken. My name was announced. But I didn't walk across the stage. I told my parents I had a scheduling conflict. The truth? I couldn't risk mispronouncing my own future in front of everyone. After college, I got a basic admin job at a nonprofit in Atlanta. Safe. Quiet. Email-based. No presentations. No icebreakers. Just spreadsheets and silence. I was good at it. Efficient. Polite. Invisible. And that's how I liked it. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Until one day, someone asked, "You ever thought about leading one of our workshops? You explain things really well in your emails." I laughed. Out loud. Not from joy. From fear. I said no. Immediately. Then spent the rest of the day wondering why I was still running from a moment that happened 5 years ago. That night, I took out one of my old notebooks. Found a speech I wrote during college. It was called The Power of Pauses. I read it out loud. To myself. In the mirror. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the sound of my own voice. It was a beginning. Quiet. Invisible. But a beginning. Most people think healing happens in dramatic moments, grand epiphanies, emotional breakdowns, cinematic sunsets. Mine came in fluorescent lighting. At a quiet community center in East Atlanta. On a Thursday. In a room that smelled like printer ink and lemon-scented cleaner. I was still working my admin job at the nonprofit, Voices Rising, an organization helping immigrants adjust to life in the U.S. I had applied mostly because of the name. Something about it felt ironic, considering how silent I had become. Most of my days were spent behind a desk, scheduling appointments, translating forms, answering emails. No voice required. But one afternoon, our program coordinator, Maria Alvarez, rushed into my cubicle with a panic in her eyes. "Aaliyah, can you sit in for me today? ESL class." The volunteer canceled. I froze. Speak? In front of them? She looked at me like I'd just asked if the sky was optional. "Yes." "You're fluent. You know the materials. They just need a little confidence. Not a lecture." I wanted to say no. Wanted to disappear into the safety of my keyboard. But her eyes were pleading. And the classroom was already full. So I nodded. The room had about 14 people. Mostly older. Mostly women. Some wore headscarves. Others wore years of weariness on their faces. They looked up at me like I held answers to questions even they didn't know how to ask. My hands were shaking. My voice uncertain. I opened the binder Maria had handed me and began slowly. "Today, we're going to learn how to ask for directions." Silence. Then a voice from the front row. "Like bus stop?" Her accent was thick. Beautiful. I smiled gently.
Yes.
Like, excuse me, where is the nearest bus stop? She repeated it, garbled,
Choppy.
her mouth unsure of where to put each syllable. She laughed at herself. This machine hates me, she muttered, tapping her throat like it was faulty equipment. The class laughed with her. Not at her, with her. And something inside me shifted. I walked up to the whiteboard and wrote the sentence, then said it again, slower,
Softer.
letting the words breathe. You don't have to sound like them, I said. Just enough so they understand. A woman in the back, a tall, quiet woman from Sudan, raised her hand. She'd never spoken in previous sessions. And if they laugh? She asked. I paused, then answered without thinking. Then they're not the ones you're talking to. That became the moment. Not a TED Talk. Not a standing ovation. Just 14 strangers breathing easier because I showed up trembling and didn't leave. After that, Maria started asking me to lead more sessions. Beginner English. Phone interviews. Basic public speaking.
Me.
The girl who had once skipped an entire semester to avoid saying her name out loud. And still, I didn't feel brave. I felt useful, which in its own way was healing. One afternoon, after class, a woman named Imaine, a Moroccan mother of two, pulled me aside. She reached into her purse and took out a folded letter. It was written in perfect English. My daughter wrote this for me, but I want you to read it. I unfolded the paper. It said, Dear Mama, I'm proud of you. I saw you read in front of people today. I want to be like you. I looked up at her, tears in both our eyes. You brought my baby into my living room, she whispered. Now she believes I can speak her world. After that, I stopped asking if I belonged in the room. Because I wasn't speaking to prove myself anymore. I was speaking to open doors for others. Quietly, without applause. I still avoided stages. Still declined invites to speak at our annual galas. But the notebooks came out again. I started writing not for protection but preparation.
Speeches.
Scripts. Messages I'd one day deliver with my own voice. And in the evenings, I recorded voice notes to myself. My accent was still there. Still soft around the edges. Still carrying history in its rhythm. But now, when I listened, I didn't hear shame. I heard story. Eventually, I started a side project, a free audio series for ESL learners called Say It Like You Mean It. Short lessons. Personal encouragement. Real-life conversations. No grammar lectures. Just voices. Just courage. We uploaded 5 episodes. Then 10. Then a listener from Toronto sent a message. My father plays your voice during breakfast. Says it makes English feel less cold. Another from Houston. Your accent sounds like mine. And for the first time, I'm not rushing to erase it. Still, I didn't advertise it.
Didn't post about it.
Didn't send it to Ryan Matthews. But I saw the numbers. Hundreds. Then thousands. All listening. All quietly healing, just like I had. There was no press release. No spotlight. But it mattered. It mattered more than any grade I'd ever received. More than any room I'd avoided. More than any voice that had tried to silence mine. One day, Maria called me into her office. Aaliyah, she said, we got an email from a TEDx organizer in Austin. I blinked. They heard your podcast. They want to know if you'd be interested in submitting a pitch. Silence. I could hear my heart thudding like a war drum. You don't have to say yes, she added quickly. But I think you're ready. I didn't answer right away. But that night, I went home, opened my laptop, typed one line on a blank document. The accent they mocked became the melody they remembered. Then I wrote the pitch. When the TEDx organizer emailed back with a green light, I stared at my screen for a long time. I had never said yes to something that scared me this much. But I did. And then I hit send. In the weeks that followed, I poured every version of myself into that talk. My past. My notebooks. My voice notes. All the moments I thought had broken me. They became building blocks. The title? Say It Anyway. The event was scheduled for mid-June in a cozy red-curtained auditorium in downtown Austin. Capacity, 200. Live stream, unknown reach. I practiced the talk in my bedroom, in my car, whispered it while doing dishes, louder while brushing my teeth. I recorded myself on my phone and played it back until I didn't flinch anymore. Each time I stumbled on a word, I left it in, deliberately. This was never about being perfect. It was about being real. I told myself, you're not performing. You're witnessing. And I believed it. The talk itself? It felt like walking barefoot across coals, and somehow never getting burned. I told them about Ryan, about the classroom, about how that moment didn't end with laughter. It began a silence that lasted years. I spoke about voice shame, about the invisible walls accents build. And then I said, an accent is not a flaw. It's a flag, a sound map of survival, a syllable that's traveled farther than you'll ever understand. When I walked off that stage, my hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from release. They clapped. They stood. Someone cried, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat.
And it was steady.
A week later, the talk went live on YouTube. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few views from friends. A comment or two from ESL students. A polite like from Maria. Instead, in 3 days, it crossed 11,000 views. In a week, 42,000. By the end of the month, 127,000. People shared it,
Tagged it.
translated it. Emails flooded in, from teachers in Turkey, nurses in Brazil, Uber drivers in Toronto. Messages that began with, "This is my story. Thank you for saying what I never could." They laughed at my accent too. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. I added captions, released a follow-up podcast episode, even got invited to speak at an online summit for educators. I was growing, publicly,
Loudly.
finally. At Voices Rising, we launched a national project, Speak Your Way In, a free storytelling initiative for new immigrants. I led the digital wing. We onboard over 1,200 learners per month. Our email open rate? 78%, higher than some Fortune 500 campaigns. I became the voice of the project.
Literally.
My recordings introduced every module, and yet at home, everything felt the same. At my parents' house in Newark, I showed my mom the talk on her tablet. She smiled, nodded, said, you're wearing too much makeup. My father's only comment, you talk too fast in English. You should slow down for them. I blinked. That's my accent, I said. He grunted. Still needs work. I wanted to scream. Not because I needed their applause, but because I had crossed oceans of doubt, and all they could notice was the shoes I wore. My brother, Darius, was worse. We hadn't talked much in months. He was busy working in finance and being perpetually unimpressed by things that didn't make six figures. He called one day out of nowhere. "Mom showed me your little YouTube video," he said. Little?
Yeah.
Real noble work. Teaching people how to talk, and whatnot. Still not a real job, though. I bit my lip. I wanted to hang up, but I stayed. Because I had finally learned, you don't need their recognition to validate your reality. And still, some nights, the silence stung. When you grow up chasing approval from people who never learned how to give it, even the loudest applause can feel empty. At one point, I was invited to speak at a panel hosted by the American Speech Language Association. I stood next to professors, authors, linguists, and when it was my turn, I didn't introduce myself with degrees or affiliations. I simply said, "My name is Aaliyah Carter. I was once laughed out of a classroom for how I speak. Now I teach others to stay." They clapped. Not out of politeness, but out of recognition. It mattered, even if my own family didn't see it. One evening, I was at a bookstore in Atlanta for a local storytelling event. After reading one of my essays aloud, a woman approached me. She had soft eyes, a Haitian accent, and a gentle posture. She held my hand and said, "I played your TED Talk for my daughter. She was being bullied for her voice. Now she practices English by pretending she's you." I smiled. Tears caught in my throat. "She doesn't have to pretend," I said. She already is. It didn't make the news. No magazine cover. No blue check. But it made a difference. And that difference echoed. Not in grand halls, but in kitchens, classrooms, living rooms. That was enough. I still remember the first time I heard the words, "Your voice matters." It was a chilly October evening, and I was sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor of a crowded, makeshift poetry cafe just off Edgewood Avenue. Atlanta had begun to wrap itself in gold leaves and cool winds. The room smelled like cinnamon tea and ambition. And that night, I wasn't just there to listen. I was there to read. My palms were damp. I could feel my heart in my throat, thudding like a bass drum. The MC called my name, Aaliyah Carter, first-time performer. There was light applause. Encouraging. Polite. I stepped up to the mic, trembling, notebook in hand. I could barely look up from the page. But as I spoke, something happened, something unfamiliar and undeniable. The words flowed. My accent danced on every line. It didn't hide anymore, it sang. There were no laughs. No smirks. There was silence. And when I finished, there was something even more shocking. A standing ovation. A woman in the front row, older, silver braids, pressed her hand to her heart and said, "I felt every word, baby." That night shifted something seismic inside me. I walked back home with my head high, the stars blinking above like they knew something I didn't yet. It wasn't just a good reading. It was a mirror showing me my reflection for the first time unfiltered. Not the version shaped by mockery, but the real me. The next morning, I applied to every open mic I could find. I started watching videos of Maya Angelou, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and even Oprah. I wasn't just admiring their poise. I was studying their rhythm, their grace, their power. Every evening, I recorded myself reading my poems aloud, cringing at first, then growing prouder with every playback. I bought a cheap microphone, created a YouTube channel. I uploaded my first video, The Girl Who Was Told to Stay Quiet. It got 42 views, then 76, then 1,203. Comments started to roll in. "Your voice is beautiful. Thank you for sharing this." I cried. This hit home. You remind me of who I used to be. With every post, I reclaimed another piece of myself. My voice wasn't just heard, it was felt. Then came the email. Subject line, TEDx Atlanta, nomination request. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But it wasn't. A TEDx curator had seen one of my videos, the one about my high school classroom and the boy who mocked me, and wanted to talk. I read the email 3 times, then burst into tears. Preparation for TEDx was like soul surgery. I spent weeks scripting my story, then rewriting it 10 times. Practicing in front of mirrors, friends, strangers, my poetry coach, anyone who'd listen. My coach, Ms. Devon, made me repeat this mantra every day. Your accent carries history. Your words carry truth. Your voice carries power. By the time the event arrived, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The stage lights hit, and I stood center stage. A sea of faces stared up at me, waiting. My heart thumped, but not with fear. With clarity. I took a breath.
And spoke.
Not with a different voice. Not with a polished, flattened, neutralized version of me. But in my voice. Accent and all. Southern. Melodic.
Poetic.
Authentic. I told them about being laughed at for the way I spoke. About sitting in a classroom with dreams buried under shame. About the boy with the loud voice who used mine as a joke. And how that joke shaped me until I shaped it back into purpose. When I finished, the room erupted.
Cheers.
Applause. People standing up in waves. But what struck me most wasn't the sound. It was the stillness. The sacred kind. The kind that follows when someone finally hears something their soul recognizes. Backstage, a producer handed me a water bottle and said, "You just made 1,000 people feel less alone." I walked outside into the crisp night air. I could hear traffic. Crickets. The muffled chatter of people still buzzing from the talk. And then, like some twist from a script I didn't write, Aaliyah? I turned. It was him. No longer the smirking boy from my high school class. Now just a man, holding a phone, looking nervous, small, somehow. I saw your talk, he said. I didn't. I mean, back then I never thought, he fumbled, then finally added. You were incredible. I nodded. Not angry. Not smug. Just free. I found my voice, I said. Took a while. But I'm glad I did. He tried to say something else. I didn't wait. I walked away, my voice trailing behind me like music. The TED Talk was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, downtown Atlanta. The room was buzzing, mostly professionals, scholars, students, and creators. People who wanted to listen, not interrupt, not laugh, not mock. My palms were damp as I stood backstage, the signature red circle visible through the curtains. The host gave a short intro about language, identity, and the strength of speaking with soul. Then my name, Aaliyah Carter. Applause. I stepped onto the stage. But something strange happened. The crowd melted away, and for a second, I was 17 again. Back in that classroom. Back where laughter was louder than learning. Except this time I wanted to speak. My voice shook at first, but I let it. When I was younger, I believed my voice didn't deserve space. Because someone taught me that if your words aren't polished, they're not valuable. That if your accent is thick, your intelligence is thin. And I carried that shame like a second skin. There was silence. Not cold.
Not awkward.
Respectful. I looked out, and their third row, slightly to the left, was him. Derek Walters. I recognized the sharp jawline. The smug eyes dulled now with time. But more than that, I felt nothing. No hate. No fear. Just stillness. I continued. I stopped raising my hand because I was tired of being corrected, not because I didn't have answers. I silenced myself because being mocked for how I spoke hurt more than being ignored. But eventually I realized our voices don't need permission. They need liberation. The words poured out, not memorized but remembered. I spoke about growing up in a Nigerian-American household, about how English was my second language, about how storytelling was my first love, and how I found power not in changing my accent, but in owning it. I ended with this. This voice, this rhythm, this accent, it carries the strength of 2 continents, the legacy of ancestors, and the fire of a girl who was told to sit down, but decided to stand anyway. The applause was thunderous. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. But all I could hear was the sound of being heard. Afterwards, there was a reception. Strangers approached me, shook my hand, asked about future events. And then him. He walked toward me slowly, hands in his pockets, that confident stride dulled by hesitation. Hey, Aaliyah, right? I nodded, calm. You probably don't remember me, he said. But I did. I'm Derek. We had speech and debate together. Back in high school. I raised an eyebrow.
Right.
The boy who used to mock me every time I read aloud. He winced. Yeah, that was me. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I don't even know why I did that. I guess I thought I was being funny, but it was cruel. I studied him, not with resentment, but with clarity. It was never about being funny, I said. It was about power. He nodded slowly. You're right. Then he offered a small, almost sheepish smile. I saw the flyer for your TED Talk a month ago. Thought it would be cool to see where you ended up. I didn't expect to feel like the villain in someone else's story. I let that hang for a moment. Funny thing is, I said gently, you weren't the only one, but you were the loudest. He looked away, ashamed. And then I did something he didn't expect. I smiled. I forgive you, I said. Not for him, but for me. Because holding on to the weight of his ignorance no longer served me. Because I wasn't the girl in the classroom anymore. I was the woman on the stage. He seemed stunned, grateful, relieved. And then he said the most honest thing I'd ever heard from him. Your voice is powerful. I mean it. I nodded. It always was. You just weren't listening. We parted ways, not as friends, but as people who had learned.
Grown. Changed.
As I walked toward the exit, people stopped me again. A woman said she wanted me to speak at her college. A young girl told me she recorded my whole talk to replay it when she needed courage. And in that moment, I felt something I had never fully felt before.
Pride.
Not in perfection, but in presence. Not in the way I pronounced my words, but in the truth they carried. When the TED Talk recording went live, I didn't expect the wave that followed. It started with a few comments, soft, kind, thoughtful. Her story hit me in the gut. Her voice is so warm. I could listen for hours. Reminds me of how my mom speaks. Beautiful. Then it snowballed. Within a week, it hit 1 million views. People from all over the world, India, Nigeria, the Philippines, Colombia, were quoting my words, sharing clips of my speech, calling their daughters into the room and saying, "Listen, this is what strength sounds like." But I knew the full circle moment hadn't come yet. Not until he heard it. Jason Mitchell. That boy with the smug grin in sophomore year speech and debate class. The boy who mimicked my vowels like they were punchlines. Who made it unsafe for me to simply speak. I never thought I'd hear from him again. And then one afternoon, my inbox chimed. Subject: I owe you an apology. From Jason Mitchell. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen like it might catch fire. Hi, Aaliyah. I don't know if you'll even read this, but I saw your TED Talk. Someone forwarded it to our alumni group chat, and I watched it 3 times. I'm writing because I need to apologize, not just for mocking your accent in class, but for being part of the reason you went silent. Back then, I didn't realize how much damage my words could do. I thought I was being funny. I thought teasing was harmless. I was wrong. You've turned your voice into something powerful. And honestly, watching you speak on that stage made me realize I've never used mine for anything meaningful. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sorry for the part one played in it. I stared at his message for a long time, and for once, I didn't feel the sting in his name anymore. I didn't feel anger or ache, just release. Because the truth was, I didn't need his apology to validate my journey. But hearing it, it reminded me how far I'd come. I responded simply, Jason, thank you. I accept your apology. May you use your voice now to uplift others. That's what I've chosen to do with mine. That same week, I got a call from an old teacher, Mrs. Green. She had watched the talk and asked if I would speak at the school's Diversity and Language Day. You'd be the perfect keynote, she said. You'd show our students that power doesn't come from sounding like everyone else. It comes from being brave enough to sound like yourself. When I stood on that stage at my old school auditorium, the seats were full of students who reminded me of younger me, curious, scared, unheard. I opened my mouth, and this time, I spoke without fear, without shrinking, without trying to flatten my syllables or hide my rhythm. I told them, you don't need to erase who you are to be respected. Your voice, your real voice, is your superpower. Speak with it, shape with it, because the world doesn't need more polished echoes. It needs your honest sound. Somewhere in the 3rd row, I saw a young girl wiping tears. She looked like she'd been holding them in for years. And I knew I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was making room for hers. Today, I no longer walk into a room worrying about how I'll sound. I walk in knowing that my voice carries stories, ancestors, strength, and survival. And no amount of mockery can take that away from me again. After the TED Talk went viral, I started receiving invitations to speak at universities, corporate events, and international panels. But more than any stage, what I cherish most are the quiet messages. Like the one from a mother in Pakistan who said, my daughter was bullied for her accent after we moved to Canada. She watched your talk and cried. She's reading her poetry out loud again. Or the boy from Louisiana who wrote, I used to pretend to be mute because I hated my voice. Now I'm in theater class and I audition with a monologue using my real accent. Those messages? They remind me of why I ever spoke up in the first place. It was never about revenge. It was about reclamation. I didn't speak to shame anyone. I spoke to reclaim the parts of myself I had been taught to bury. And in doing so, I gave others permission to do the same. These days, I run a nonprofit that provides public speaking workshops to immigrants, refugees, and international students. We don't teach them how to neutralize their accents. We teach them how to own them, because our differences were never meant to be erased. They were meant to be heard, clearly, proudly, unapologetically. One of my favorite students, Rafael, from Brazil, once said during a workshop, "For the first time, I feel like my voice belongs in the room." And I told him, it always did. The room just wasn't ready until now. Sometimes I think back to that classroom. Sophomore year. Jason snicker. My cheeks burning. My voice trembling. And then I remember standing on that TED stage. My heart steady. My voice unwavering. My accent untouched. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't erase what happened. It just rewrites what it meant. I used to think my accent was a flaw, something to be corrected. Now I know it's a thread, woven from every place I've loved, every person who raised me, every story passed down in my family's tongue. It's not broken English. It's braided identity. And if you're reading this, wondering whether your voice is good enough, let me say this. Don't silence yourself to be accepted. Don't flatten your roots to fit someone else's shape. Your voice is not a mistake. It's a map, a melody, a movement. Use it, because somewhere, there's a girl like I was, hunched in her seat, ashamed of how she sounds, waiting for someone like you to show her that her voice deserves the mic too. And when you speak, really speak, with your whole self, you don't just change minds. You change the world. So, the next time someone mocks your voice, your accent, your roots, remember this. They're only afraid of what they don't understand. Sophia didn't just survive the ridicule, she transformed it. She didn't shrink. She stood up. And when she spoke, the world listened. What started as classroom humiliation became a global message of empowerment. And you have that same power. Your voice, however it sounds, matters. Not in spite of your accent, but because of it.
So speak loudly.
Speak proudly. And never let anyone shame the sound of your soul. Because one day, the world might just rise to its feet and give you a standing ovation.